Conventional wisdom warns against looking back at those who broke you. But a wedding invitation changes everything. Audrey Sterling received a gold-embossed card from Caleb, the ex-fiancé, who abandoned her for a trust fund 3 years ago. The couple intended to humiliate her before the town's elite, desiring a spectator for their victory lap. However, they made a fatal error. Audrey was no longer the girl who cried on bathroom floors. She wasn't catching the bouquet. She was coming to foreclose on the venue. Buckle up, because this isn't a love story. It is an autopsy of a wedding. The envelope felt heavy in Audrey Sterling's hand, the kind of weight that screams old money and desperate overcompensation. It was cream-colored, textured like linen with calligraphy so ornate it was almost illegible. But the names were clear enough: Mr. Caleb Montgomery and Miss Tiffany Roach. Audrey sat at her glass desk in her corner office in downtown Seattle, the rain streaking the windows behind her. It had been 3 years. 3 years since Caleb had sat her down in their cramped apartment and told her that he needed more. He hadn't just broken up with her, he had dismantled her. He told her she was too safe, too pedestrian, and frankly, not the kind of woman a Montgomery brings home to mother. 2 weeks later, he was seen on Instagram with Tiffany Roach, a pharmaceutical heiress with a laugh too loud for polite society and a reputation for stealing things she didn't need. "You're not going," her assistant Sarah said, peering over her shoulder at the invite. "Tell me you are not going to let those vultures pick at your bones." Audrey flipped the card over. There was a handwritten note on the back in Tiffany's distinct bubbly scrawl. "Audrey, we'd love for you to come. No hard feelings, right? It would mean so much to Caleb to see you support us. Plus we have an open bar." The winking face was the dagger. It implied Audrey needed free alcohol to cope. It implied Audrey was still the broke law student Caleb had abandoned. What Tiffany and Caleb didn't know, what nobody in their circle knew, was that Audrey's life had pivoted violently after the breakup. Pain is a hell of a fuel. Audrey hadn't just finished law school. She had specialized in high-stakes corporate forensic accounting. She spent her days hunting down hidden assets for federal investigations. She didn't just read balance sheets, she weaponized them. And recently her firm had been looking into a shell company called Obsidian Holdings, a company that coincidentally was the primary financial vehicle for the Roche family fortune. Audrey opened her laptop. She typed in Caleb Montgomery. He was listed as a strategic consultant for Roche Pharma now. Of course he was. "I'm going," Audrey said, her voice dropping an octave. "Why?" Sarah gasped. "To throw wine on her dress. No." Audrey smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Because I did a title search on the venue listed here. The Montgomery estate at Blackwood. It's their ancestral home. But according to the county clerk, the property taxes haven't been paid in 4 years. Audrey tapped the invitation against her chin. "They aren't just getting married, Sarah. They're merging 2 sinking ships and painting them gold. And they invited me to watch. I think it's only polite I show up with a gift." She picked up her phone and dialed a number. "Declan. It's Audrey. I got the invite. You were right. I'm in." The wedding was set for a crisp Saturday in October. The Montgomery estate, Blackwood, was a sprawling Georgian mansion about an hour outside the city. It was the kind of place where the driveway was a mile long and the trees looked like they judged your credit score as you drove past. Audrey arrived in a rented vintage Aston Martin. She stepped out, smoothing down her dress. She had debated wearing black too cliché, red too desperate. Instead, She wore a deep emerald green silk gown that fit her like a second skin. It was elegant, understated, and cost more than Caleb's first car. As she handed the keys to the valet, she saw the heads turn. The whispers started immediately. "Is that her? The ex, why is she here? She looks expensive." Audrey walked up the stone steps, chin high. She spotted Victoria Montgomery Caleb's mother, holding court near the entrance. Victoria was a woman who wore pearls like armor. When she saw Audrey, her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before snapping back into a rictus of fake hospitality. "Audrey," Victoria cooed, stepping forward but not offering a hug. "We were surprised you accepted. Bold choice." "Victoria," Audrey nodded. "Tiffany insisted. I couldn't say no to such a heartfelt plea for support." "Well," Victoria sniffed, looking Audrey up and down, searching for a loose thread, a scuff, anything to criticize. Finding nothing, she gestured to the side. "The friends of the groom are seated in the back near the kitchen entrance. We had to squeeze so many dignitaries in, you understand." "Perfectly," Audrey said. "I prefer a vantage point where I can see everything." She walked into the garden where the ceremony was to be held. It was excessively lavish. Thousands of white roses, a string quartet playing Taylor Swift covers, and enough crystal to blind a pilot. Standing near the altar, looking nervous and sweating through his custom Armani suit, was Caleb. He looked older, tired. The charm that had once blinded Audrey seemed to have eroded, revealing the weak chin beneath. When he locked eyes with Audrey, he froze. He clearly hadn't expected her to actually show up. He looked terrified. Good, Audrey thought. She took her seat in the back row as instructed. Next to her sat a man in a dark suit, looking bored. It was Declan Caleb's estranged cousin, the black sheep of the family because he chose to be a mechanic rather than pretend to run a hedge fund. "You actually came," Declan whispered, not looking at her. "You're a masochist, Sterling." "I'm a connoisseur of train wrecks, Declan," she whispered back. "Did you bring the file?" Declan tapped the inside of his jacket. "USB drive. Right here. You sure about this? Once we do this, there's no going back. You burn this bridge. You burn the whole town." "They invited me to humiliate me, Declan," Audrey said, her eyes fixed on the altar where Tiffany was about to make her entrance. "They wanted to show me I wasn't good enough for this family. I'm just going to prove them right. I'm not good enough for them. I'm better." The music swelled. The crowd stood. Tiffany Roach appeared at the top of the aisle. Her dress was massive, an explosion of tulle and lace that cost 6 figures. She looked triumphant. As she walked down the aisle, she scanned the crowd, her eyes landing on Audrey in the back row. Tiffany smirked. It was a small, nasty little twist of the lips. She gave a tiny wave, making sure everyone saw her, acknowledging the sad ex-girlfriend in the back. Audrey simply raised an eyebrow. "Enjoy the walk, Tiffany. It's a long way down." The ceremony was a blur of hollow vows. Caleb promised to honor and provide, which made Audrey snort softly. Tiffany promised to stand by him in wealth and in more wealth. The crowd laughed politely. But the real show was the reception. It was held in the grand ballroom. Audrey was seated at table 19, the table full for miscellaneous guests, right next to the swinging doors of the catering kitchen. Every time a waiter walked out, she got hit with the smell of steamed salmon. She didn't eat. She just watched. Halfway through the dinner, the best man, a fraternity brother of Caleb's named Chad, stood up for the speeches. He was already drunk. "To Caleb," Chad yelled, "the man who finally locked it down. We were worried for a while there, buddy. You went through let's call it a budget phase a few years ago." The room chuckled. Audrey felt the eyes darting toward her. The budget phase. That was her. Then Tiffany stood up. She grabbed the microphone, her face flushed with champagne and malice. "I just want to thank everyone for coming." Tiffany beamed, especially those who traveled from the past. She looked directly at Audrey. The spotlight operator, seemingly in on the joke, swung the beam of light onto table 19. Audrey was suddenly blinded, illuminated for the whole room to gawk at. "Audrey," Tiffany called out, "so brave of you to come, really. I know it must be hard seeing Caleb so happy, but we really wanted you to see that everything happens for a reason. You were the stepping stone, honey, and I'm the destination." A hush fell over the room. It was too mean even for them. But then Victoria Montgomery started clapping, slowly. Then others joined in. It was a public shaming disguised as a toast. Tiffany signaled to the AV guy. "We actually put together a little slideshow of our journey, and we included everyone who helped us get here." The giant screen behind the head table flickered to life. It showed photos of Caleb and Tiffany on yachts in Paris and Aspen. Then the slide changed. It was a photo from 3 years ago. It was Audrey taken by a paparazzi or a friend the day Caleb moved out. She was wearing sweatpants, no makeup, crying, holding a box of books on the street curb. She looked broken. The caption under the photo read, "Before he upgraded." The room gasped. Some laughed. Caleb looked down at his plate, ashamed but too cowardly to stop it. Audrey felt the heat rise in her cheeks. This was it. This was the moment they had planned. They wanted to break her spirit publicly. They wanted her to run out of the room, crying so they could have a story to tell at brunch for the next 10 years. She ran away. She couldn't handle it. Poor little thing. Audrey took a deep breath. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She stood up. She picked up her champagne flute and walked out of the spotlight, moving toward the stage. The clicking of her heels on the marble floor echoed in the silent room. "Where is she going?" Tiffany whispered into the mic, confused. Audrey walked right up to the AV booth on the side of the stage. She looked at the technician, a young kid who looked terrified. "Plug this in," Audrey said, sliding the USB drive Declan had given her onto his console. I can't," the kid stammered. Audrey leaned in. "Kid, look at me. In about 5 minutes, the FBI is going to walk through those doors. Do you want to be the guy who helped them hide evidence, or the guy who helped expose it?" The kid's eyes went wide. He took the drive. Audrey walked up the stairs to the head table. She didn't grab the mic from Tiffany. She just stood at the podium next to the bride. "Thank you, Tiffany," Audrey said, her voice projecting clearly, even without the mic trained from years of courtroom testimony. "That was educational. You're right. I was a stepping stone." She turned to face the room. The projector screen behind her went black for a second. "But you seem to be confused about where the path leads," Audrey continued. "You think you married a fortune Tiffany, and Caleb, you think you married a safety net." The screen flickered back to life. But the photo of Audrey crying was gone. In its place was a bank statement. A very specific bank statement from the Cayman Islands, with the header, Obsidian Holdings. Victoria Montgomery stood up her chair, scraping loudly. "Cut the feed, them all. Cut it now." "Sit down, Victoria." Audrey's voice cracked like a whip. For the first time, she used the microphone. "We are just getting to the toasts." The document on the screen zoomed in. It showed a series of transfers. "For those who can't read the fine print," Audrey said calmly, This is a record of the Montgomery family legally selling this estate, Blackwood, to Obsidian Holdings 6 months ago. Caleb, you don't own this house. Your mother sold it to cover her gambling debts. Caleb's head snapped toward his mother. What? And Tiffany? Audrey turned to the bride, whose face had gone pale white. Obsidian Holdings is owned by your father, but here is the twist. Audrey clicked a clicker she had swiped from the AV desk. The slide changed. It was a foreclosure notice. Your father's company, Obsidian, is bankrupt. He leveraged this house and your pharmaceutical stocks to pay off blackmailers regarding a certain FDA violation. The bank seized all assets as of 5:00 p.m. yesterday. Audrey looked out at the sea of stunned faces. So technically, Audrey smiled, looking at the lavish decorations, we are all trespassing on government property, and this wedding, it was paid for with a credit card that was declined this morning. The caterers just told me they're packing up unless they get cash. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. Then the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, getting louder by the second. Oh, Audrey said, checking her watch. And that would be the authorities. Happy wedding day. The sirens weren't just a threat in the distance anymore. They were a cacophony right outside the leaded glass windows of the ballroom. Blue and red lights washed over the terrified guests, turning their expensive faces into ghostly masks. Inside the room, the silence that followed Audrey's speech broke into absolute bedlam. It started with the staff. The head of catering, a stern man named Mario, who had been eyeing the open bar tab with suspicion all night, snapped his fingers. Immediately, the waiters stopped pouring. One waiter holding a tray of filet mignon literally turned around mid-step and walked back into the kitchen. "Excuse me," Victoria Montgomery shrieked, her voice cracking. "Where are you going with that? My guests are hungry." "The credit card on file was just declined, Mrs. Montgomery," Mario said, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "And based on what the lady on stage just said, I'm not serving another crumb until I see cash. 50,000. Now." Victoria fumbled with her clutch, her hands shaking so violently she dropped her lipstick. She looked at her husband, Preston, but he was staring at his phone, his face grey. "Preston, do something. My accounts are frozen." Preston whispered, the horror dawning on him. "Victoria, the app won't let me log in." On the stage, Tiffany Roche had abandoned the blushing bride act. She turned on her father, Richard Roche, who was sitting at the head table loosening his tie, as if he couldn't breathe. "Daddy," Tiffany hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "What is she talking about? What does she mean, bankrupt? You told me the merger with Caleb's family would fix the liquidity issue. Richard Roche, a man who usually projected the arrogance of a king, looked like a cornered rat." "It's a mistake, Tiff. Just a clerical error. That woman is lying." He pointed a trembling finger at Audrey. "She's a bitter, jealous ex-girlfriend making up stories." Audrey didn't flinch. She simply leaned into the microphone again. "Agent Miller," she called out calmly, "you can come in now." The double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. It wasn't the local sheriff. It was a team of federal agents in windbreakers labeled FBI, Financial Crimes Division. The room erupted in screams. Socialites in Louboutins scrambled over chairs to get away from the head table. It was a stampede of silk and panic. Leading the agents was Agent Miller, a tall woman with a no-nonsense bun. She walked straight towards her, the head table ignoring the chaotic guests. "Richard Roche," Miller barked, "you are under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and operating a Ponzi scheme. Victoria Montgomery, you are being detained for questioning regarding money laundering and conspiracy." Conspiracy? Victoria gasped as an agent grabbed her wrist. I am a victim. I didn't know. You signed the deed transfer, Victoria, Audrey said, from the stage looking down at her former mother-in-law. You sold this house to a shell company to hide assets from the IRS. That makes you a co-conspirator. You didn't just sell the house. You sold your freedom. Caleb stood frozen in the center of the storm. He looked from his mother being handcuffed to his father-in-law, being read his rights. Then he looked at Tiffany. Tiffany wasn't looking at him with love. She was looking at him with pure, unadulterated hatred. You said you had money, Tiffany screamed at him, shoving his chest. You said the Montgomery Trust was ironclad. You told me we could pay off my dad's investors with your family's capital. Me, Caleb yelled back, his voice cracking. You said you were the heiress. You said this wedding was a write-off. I only married you because your dad promised me a seat on the board. The crowd, those who hadn't fled, watched in morbid fascination. The truth was spilling out like blood from a wound. It wasn't a love match. It never was. It was a transaction. Two drowning families grabbing onto each other, hoping the other would float. Audrey stepped down from the stage. She walked through the chaos, the sea of panic parting for her. She moved with the calm of someone who had already read the end of the book. She walked up to the table where Declan was sitting. He was the only person sitting. He was calmly sipping the last of his champagne, watching his aunt being stuffed into a police car through the window. Did you know it was this bad? Declan asked, gesturing to the madness. I knew about the fraud, Audrey said, taking a seat next to him. But the fact that they are turning on each other this fast, that's just a bonus. So, Declan swirled his glass. Who actually owns the house now? Technically, the Department of Justice seized it about 20 minutes ago, Audrey explained. But since my firm was appointed as the forensic auditors for the receivership, I'm technically the custodian of the property until the trial. Declan laughed a rich, genuine sound. So you're in charge. I'm in charge, Audrey confirmed. Suddenly, a shadow fell over the table. It was Caleb. He looked wrecked. His tie was crooked, his hair disheveled, and his eyes were wide with a mix of fear and desperation. He ignored Declan. He looked only at Audrey. Audrey, he breathed. Audrey, you have to help me. Audrey looked up at him, her expression unreadable. Help you, Caleb? I just got your mother arrested. I don't think I'm the help you're looking for. I didn't know, Caleb pleaded, dropping to his knees. It was a pathetic sight, the golden boy on his knees in a tuxedo, begging the girl he threw away. I didn't know about the fraud. I didn't know about the shell companies. I just signed what they told me to sign. You know me, Audrey. I'm not a criminal. I'm just stupid with numbers. You used to do my taxes. I did, Audrey said softly. I did your taxes. I cleaned your apartment. I proofread your emails so you'd sound smart to your bosses. I did everything for you, Caleb. Yes? Caleb seized on this. Exactly. We were a team. Look, I made a mistake. A huge mistake. Tiffany, she's a monster. She tricked me. But we can fix this. You're the auditor, right? You can tell them I was a victim. You can get me out of this. He reached out to touch her hand. Audrey pulled her hand away as if he were burning hot. Caleb, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the noise of the room. Do you remember the last thing you said to me when you kicked me out? You said I lacked vision. You said I was holding you back from your potential. Caleb flinched. Well, Audrey gestured to the police lights flashing against the walls. I think you've finally reached your potential. You're not a victim, Caleb. You're a co-conspirator. I saw your signature on the Obsidian Holdings board minutes. You accepted a salary from a bankrupt company. That's fraud. I can testify against them. Caleb wept. I'll give you anything. I don't need you to give me anything, Audrey said, standing up and smoothing her emerald dress. I already have everything. I have the files. I have the emails. And I have the satisfaction of watching you realize that the budget girl is the only reason you aren't in handcuffs yet. Yet, Caleb went pale. Agent Miller is giving you a grace period to turn yourself in voluntarily tomorrow morning, Audrey said coldly. Because I asked her to. Consider it my wedding gift. You get one last night in your own bed. Alone. The sun rose over Seattle the next morning, indifferent to the destruction of the Montgomery and Roach dynasties. But the internet was not indifferent. By 8:00 a.m., the video of Audrey's speech filmed by a dozen stunned guests was viral. The wedding audit was trending worldwide. People were dissecting every frame: Tiffany's horror, Victoria's arrogance, and Audrey's calm, lethal precision. Audrey sat in her apartment drinking black coffee. Her phone had been buzzing non-stop for hours. Reporters, old friends, random strangers congratulating her. She ignored them all. She was waiting for one specific call. At 9:15 a.m., her phone rang. It was the receptionist at her firm. Miss Sterling, there's a Mrs. Caleb Montgomery here to see you. She says it's urgent. Audrey smiled. Send her in. 20 minutes later, Tiffany Roach. Technically, Tiffany Montgomery, now as they had signed the license before the ceremony to secure the assets that didn't exist, stormed into Audrey's office. Tiffany looked nothing like the polished princess of the day before. She was wearing oversized sunglasses, a hoodie, and jeans. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She looked like a fugitive. She slammed her hands on Audrey's desk. You ruined my life, Tiffany spat. Good morning to you too, Tiffany, Audrey said, not looking up from her laptop. Please take a seat, or don't. The chairs are expensive. You planned this, Tiffany hissed, pacing the room. You waited until the wedding. You could have reported this weeks ago. Why wait until the ceremony? Audrey finally looked up. Her eyes were hard. Because you sent the invitation, Tiffany. You wanted an audience, you got one. You wanted to rub my nose in your success. I just wanted to make sure the picture was accurate. My father had a heart attack in custody last night, Tiffany said, her voice shaking. He's in the hospital. Mom is sedated. And Caleb, that coward, is at his lawyer's office trying to annul the marriage. He won't be able to, Audrey said matter-of-factly. I checked the statutes. In this state, fraud is grounds for annulment only if the other party wasn't complicit. But you were both defrauding each other. It's actually quite poetic. You're stuck with him and his debts. Tiffany ripped off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red and puffy. What do you want, Audrey? You won. Is that it? You want me to beg? I don't want anything from you, Audrey said. You have nothing I want. You're broke, Tiffany. Actually, you're worse than broke. You're negative. The assets seized won't cover the liabilities. You're going to be working retail for the rest of your life, just to pay the interest on the legal fees. Tiffany slumped into the chair, the fight draining out of her. Why do you hate me so much? I just fell in love with him. Audrey laughed, a dry, sharp sound. Don't insult my intelligence. You didn't love him. You poached him. You saw a guy with a last name that sounded like money, and you took him because you thought it would save your daddy's company. And he went with you because he's weak and greedy. Audrey stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rainy city. I don't hate you, Tiffany. I pity you. You spent your whole life thinking you were better than everyone because of a bank account you didn't earn. Yesterday was just gravity taking effect. Tiffany stared at the floor. Caleb told me you were boring. I am boring, Audrey agreed. I like rules. I like clear spreadsheets. I like paying taxes. And you know what boring gets you, Tiffany? It gets you freedom. I can walk out of this office today and go anywhere I want. You can't leave the state. There was a knock on the door. It was security. Ms. Roach, the guard said, we need you to leave. You're not a client. Tiffany stood up slowly. She looked small. Caleb is going to prison, isn't he? Likely, Audrey said. For a few years. White-collar crime, minimum security. He'll be fine. He's good at following orders. And me? Tiffany asked. You weren't on the board, Audrey said. You might avoid jail time if you cooperate, but you'll lose everything else. The penthouse, the cars, the jewelry, the ring. Tiffany looked down at the massive diamond on her finger. Actually, Audrey said, that ring is listed as an asset of Obsidian Holdings. You need to leave it here. It's evidence. Tiffany gasped, clutching her hand to her chest. No, it's mine. It was bought with stolen funds, Tiffany, Audrey said, holding out her hand. Give it to me, or I call Agent Miller and tell her you're concealing assets. That's a felony. Do you want to join your dad in the ward? Tiffany trembled. Tears streamed down her face. Slowly, painfully, she slid the massive ring off her finger. She slammed it into Audrey's palm. I hope you rot, Tiffany whispered. Get in line. Audrey closed her fist around the cold diamond. After Tiffany left, Audrey sat back down. She opened her hand and looked at the ring. It was gaudy, excessive, and fake. Not the diamond was real, but the sentiment behind it was fake. She dropped the ring into an evidence bag, sealed it, and labeled it Exhibit A. She thought it was over. She thought the slate was clean. But her phone rang again. This time the caller ID made her pause. It was Declan Montgomery. Audrey. His voice was serious. You need to come back to the estate. Now. Why? Audrey asked. The police have secured it. Not this part, Declan said. I'm in the grandfather's study. We found a safe. The police can't crack it, but Caleb said you know the combination. Why would I know the combination to the grandfather's safe? Because Caleb used your birthday as the code, Declan said. And Audrey, you need to see what's inside. It's not money. It's journals, and they don't just implicate the Roaches. They implicate everyone. Audrey felt a chill run down her spine. Who is everyone? The mayor, the governor, and your boss. Audrey hung up the phone. The wedding was just the beginning. The real war was just starting. The drive back to the Montgomery estate felt like driving into a funeral that hadn't ended yet. The rain had picked up, lashing against the windshield of Audrey's Aston Martin. When she arrived, the flashing blue lights were gone, replaced by the stark yellow glow of security floodlights. The party was over. The autopsy of the estate had begun. Declan met her at the side entrance near the servants' quarters. He looked grim. He had shed his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing tattoos that hinted at a life far removed from this country club world. The police cleared out an hour ago, Declan said, leading her through the dark, echoing hallways. They sealed the main office, but they missed the grandfather's private study. Caleb always said the old man didn't trust banks. He trusted steel. They entered the study. It smelled of old leather and cigars. Behind a heavy velvet painting of a fox hunt, a wall safe sat exposed. I tried 1234. I tried Caleb's birthday. I tried the date the house was built, Declan said. Then I remembered Caleb saying once when he was drunk that the only pure thing in his life was you. He used your birthday for an everything. His PIN, his phone code, and apparently he reset the grandfather's safe to it when he took over the estate. Audrey stepped forward. She hesitated. It felt invasive stepping back into the mind of a man who had discarded her. She typed in the digits 0412. The mechanism clicked. A heavy thunk echoed in the room. The door swung open. Inside there were no stacks of cash or gold bars. There were 3 leather-bound notebooks and a stack of external hard drives. Audrey pulled out the top notebook. It was a ledger, handwritten. She flipped through the pages, her forensic eye scanning the columns. Dates, amounts, initials. "What is it?" Declan asked, leaning over her shoulder. "It's a bribe ledger," Audrey whispered, her blood running cold. "These are payoffs, zoning permits, FDA fast-tracking, judge tampering." She turned the page to an entry dated 3 years ago, right around the time Caleb dumped her. Entry payment to AG. Consultation fee, $500,000. Audrey froze. AG. She flipped back. The initials appeared over and over again. AG was receiving massive payouts from the Roche family fortune for protection services. "Who is AG?" Declan asked. Audrey felt nauseous. She grabbed the desk for support. "Arthur Garrison." Declan frowned. "The managing partner of your firm, your boss, my mentor," Audrey corrected, her voice trembling with rage. "The man who hired me when no one else would. The man who assigned me to the Roche investigation." She grabbed the hard drive and plugged it into Declan's laptop. She bypassed the encryption sloppy work, likely Caleb's doing, and opened the emails. There it was, an email chain between Richard Roche and Arthur Garrison. Subject, the girl. From AG to R. Roche. "Richard, you've missed 3 payments. My patience is wearing thin. If the funds aren't wired by Friday, I'm putting my best bloodhound on the scent. Her name is Audrey Sterling. She's Caleb's ex. She's motivated. She's brilliant. And she has no idea she's working for me. I will unleash her on you, and she will burn your little empire to the ground, so I can buy the scraps. Pay up, or I let her off the leash." Audrey stared at the screen, the white light illuminating her pale face. She hadn't been a hero. She hadn't been an avenging angel. She was a weapon. Arthur Garrison had known about her history with Caleb. He had manipulated her pain, weaponized her heartbreak, and pointed her at the Roaches, not to serve justice but to punish them for missing their extortion payments. "He played me," Audrey whispered. "He knew I'd destroy them. He counted on it." "So," Declan said, his voice low, "the wedding crash wasn't just your revenge. It was his collection call. He's going to buy Obsidian Holdings for pennies on the dollar once the dust settles," Audrey realized. "He used the FBI to clear the board so he could take over the assets. He's not just a lawyer. He's the crime boss." Suddenly, Audrey's phone rang. The screen displayed a picture of a smiling, silver-haired man. Caller ID Arthur Garrison. Audrey stared at the phone. It felt like a bomb. "Answer it," Declan said. "Put it on speaker." Audrey slid her thumb across the screen. "Arthur." "Audrey." Arthur's voice was booming, jovial. "I just saw the news footage. My God, you were magnificent. I'm coming to foreclose on the venue. Iconic. The partners are already talking about a promotion. Junior partner, Audrey. Corner office with a view of the Sound." "Thank you, Arthur," Audrey said, her voice flat. "It was A long time coming. Listen. Arthur's tone shifted, becoming casual, too casual. I heard a rumor that the feds missed a safe at the estate. Caleb's lawyer mentioned it. You're the custodian of the property right now. Did you find any sensitive client privilege documents that we should secure before the DOJ gets their messy hands on them? He knew about the ledger. I'm at the estate now. Audrey lied effortlessly. I haven't found a safe yet, but I'm looking. There was a pause, a silence that lasted 3 seconds too long. Good. Arthur said, his voice dropping a few degrees. Keep looking. And Audrey, if you do find anything, bring it straight to me. Don't call the FBI agent. You know how they twist things. We need to protect the firm's integrity. Of course, Arthur. You're my priority. That's my girl. See you in the morning. The line went dead. Audrey looked at Declan. He knows I have it. He's sending someone. How do you know? Because he called me Audrey. He never uses my first name unless he's threatening me or firing someone. He usually calls me Sterling. Audrey ejected the hard drive and grabbed the journals. We have to go, she said. If we stay here, we're dead. But we can't go to the police. Arthur has judges on his payroll. If I hand this evidence over to the wrong person, it disappears, and I have a car accident. So what do we do? Declan asked, grabbing his car keys. Run. Audrey paused at the door of the study. She looked at the wreckage of the life Caleb had chosen. She looked at the empty space where the wedding cake had been. No. Audrey said, a dangerous smile forming on her lips. I'm done running. I'm done being the victim. I'm done being the employee. She looked at Declan. Do you know how to fix a PA system? I'm a mechanic. Declan shrugged. I can fix anything with wires. Good, Audrey said. Because tomorrow morning, Arthur Garrison is holding a press conference to celebrate the firm's victory against corruption. I think it's time we made a contribution to the agenda. The morning of the press conference dawned with a deceptive calm. The sky over Seattle was a sheet of relentless gray, the kind that swallows the tops of skyscrapers and muffles the sounds of the city. But inside the headquarters of Garrison and Finch, the atmosphere was electric. The firm's offices occupied the 40th through 45th floors of the Columbia Center, a fortress of glass and steel that looked down on the rest of the world. Today, the main conference room on the 42nd floor had been transformed into a stage for Arthur Garrison's victory lap. Rows of folding chairs were filled with reporters from every major network, their cameras mounted on tripods like a forest of unblinking eyes. The air smelled of stale coffee and expensive cologne. Junior associates scurried around the perimeter checking microphones and handing out glossy press kits that touted the firm's unwavering commitment to ethical justice. Arthur Garrison stood at the podium basking in the pre-show glow. He looked every inch the benevolent crusader. He wore a bespoke navy suit that draped perfectly over his shoulders, an American flag pin on his lapel, and a smile that had disarmed juries and destroyed opponents for 30 years. He was the picture of integrity, a carefully constructed mirage that Audrey intended to shatter. Audrey Sterling stood at the very back of the room, hidden in the shadows near the catering cart. She was wearing the same emerald green silk dress she had worn to the wedding the night before. It was wrinkled now, and she hadn't slept in 24 hours, but she felt a strange, vibrating energy coursing through her. It was the adrenaline of the hunt. She watched Arthur rehearse his opening remarks, his voice booming and confident. He was a man who believed his own lies. He believed he was untouchable. He believed Audrey was his creature, a tool he had sharpened and pointed at his enemies. He was about to learn that tools can be dangerous when mishandled. "Audrey." She turned to see Sarah, her assistant, standing beside her. Sarah looked terrified. She was clutching her phone like a lifeline. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah whispered. Her eyes darting toward the security guards stationed at the doors. "Arthur has friends everywhere. The police, the judges. If this goes wrong, you won't just lose your job. You'll disappear." "I know," Audrey said, her voice steady. "That's why we can't miss." "Declan is in position," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "He's in the parking garage, 3 floors down. He's tapped into the building's AV network. He says the encryption was a joke. He's waiting for your signal." Audrey nodded. "Go home, Sarah. You don't need to be seen with me when this happens." "I'm staying," Sarah said, straightening her spine. "I hate this place. I want to watch it burn." At the front of the room, the lights dimmed slightly. A hush fell over the crowd. Arthur Garrison cleared his throat and leaned into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on such short notice." Arthur began, his voice rich and commanding. "We at Garrison and Finch believe in accountability. It is the cornerstone of our democracy. When we discovered the financial irregularities in the Roche family, finance is a family we trusted, a family we represented, we didn't hesitate. We didn't bury the truth. We investigated it." He paused for effect, looking out at the reporters with a grave expression. "We put our best investigator on the case because justice is not just a word to us. It is a promise. We followed the money no matter where it led, even when it led to uncomfortable truths." Audrey felt a surge of nausea. The hypocrisy was suffocating. He was taking credit for the destruction he had orchestrated, painting himself as the hero who slayed the dragon, when in reality he was the one who had been feeding it. "And here she is." Arthur's voice suddenly shifted, becoming jovial. He scanned the room until his eyes landed on Audrey in the back. The woman of the hour, the brilliant mind behind the discovery, Audrey Sterling. "Come up here, Audrey. Take a bow." The spotlight swung around, blinding her. The reporters turned in their seats, craning their necks to see the woman who had brought down the Roche dynasty. Arthur was playing his final card. He wanted to parade her. He wanted to hug her in front of the cameras, to bond her to him publicly. If she walked up there and accepted his praise, she became complicit. She became part of the Garrison and Finch brand. It was a masterstroke of manipulation. Audrey didn't hesitate. She began to walk up the center aisle. Her heels clicked rhythmically on the polished floor. The sound echoed in the silent room. She kept her face neutral, a mask of professional detachment. As she approached the stage, she saw the triumph in Arthur's eyes. He thought he had won. He thought she was coming to kiss the ring. She stepped onto the stage. The heat from the stage lights was intense. Arthur extended his hand for a handshake, beaming at the cameras. Audrey looked at his hand. Then she looked at the microphone. She stepped past him, ignoring his hand entirely. A ripple of confusion went through the room. Arthur's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly, chuckling as if it were a quirky misunderstanding. Audrey gripped the podium. She looked out at the sea of faces, the journalists, the partners, the hungry eyes of the public. "Thank you, Arthur," she said. Her voice was calm, amplified clearly through the room. "It's true. I believe in accountability. I believe that numbers don't lie. People lie. Ledgers, they always tell the truth." She reached into her clutch and pulled out a small black remote control. It was a simple device usually used for PowerPoint presentations. "Audrey," Arthur whispered, stepping closer, his voice laced with warning. What are you doing? Stick to the script. There is no script, Arthur, Audrey said, loud enough for the microphone to catch. There is only the audit. She pressed the button. 3 floors down, inside a nondescript utility van, Declan Montgomery hit the Enter key on his laptop. The massive LED screens behind Arthur's screens that usually displayed stock market tickers and the firm's logo flickered violently. The blue Garrison and Finch logo dissolved into static. Then a document appeared. It was magnified to 10 times its original size. It was a scanned page from a handwritten ledger. The handwriting was jagged, old-fashioned. The columns were clear. Date, October 12th, 2023. Transaction consultation fee. Recipient AG. Amount $500,000. A murmur ran through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in on the screen. Arthur turned around. When he saw the document, the blood drained from his face so fast, he looked like he might faint. "Technical difficulties," Arthur shouted, waving his arms at the AV booth. "Cut the feed. Turn it off now." "It's not a glitch, Arthur," Audrey said, her voice cutting through his panic. "It's the truth." She pressed the button again. The screen changed. This time, it wasn't a document. It was a video file. The quality was grainy, taken from a security camera with a timestamp from 3 years ago. The setting was unmistakable, the library of the Montgomery estate. The fox hunt painting was visible in the background. On the screen, 2 men stood in the center of the room. One was Richard Roche. The other was Arthur Garrison. The audio crackled to life, filling the silent conference room. "I can make the FDA problem go away, Richard." Arthur's voice on the recording was smooth, predatory. "But it will cost you. My firm needs a retainer. $5 million. And another $1 million every year for maintenance." "That's extortion, Arthur," Richard Roche's voice replied. "Call it what you want," Arthur said, picking up a briefcase from the desk. "But without me, you're in federal prison. With me, you're a philanthropist. Your choice." The video froze on the image of Arthur Garrison smiling as he accepted the briefcase. The room erupted. It was chaos. Reporters were shouting questions, flashbulbs were exploding like strobe lights, and the junior associates were looking at their phones in horror as the live stream comments rolled in. "She's lying." Arthur screamed, his composure shattering completely. He lunged for the microphone, his face twisted in a snarl. "This is a fabrication. It's a deep fake. She's a disgruntled employee. She's mentally unstable." Audrey didn't flinch. She simply sidestepped him, moving with the grace of a matador. "I have submitted the digital forensic logs to the FBI, the SEC, and the New York Times," she said, speaking directly into the camera lens, addressing the millions watching at home. "The email chains, the offshore bank transfers, and the voice recordings from the safe you tried to have me destroy. It's all there." Arthur grabbed her arm. His grip was bruising. "You ungrateful little witch," he hissed, spittle flying from his lips. "I made you. You were nothing. A crying little girl in a cheap suit who couldn't keep a man. I gave you a career. I gave you teeth." Audrey looked down at his hand on her arm. Then she looked up into his eyes. Her expression was cold, hard, and absolutely terrifying. "You did," she whispered. "You gave me teeth. And then you forgot that I know how to bite." She yanked her arm free. At that moment, the double doors at the back of the room burst open with a resounding crash. Agent Miller walked in. But this time, she wasn't just accompanied by her team. She was flanked by U.S. Marshals in tactical gear. "Arthur Garrison," Agent Miller's voice was a thunderclap. "Step away from the podium. Keep your hands where we can see them." Arthur looked at the doors. He looked at the window, his eyes darting frantically, as if calculating the fall. He looked back at his partners, who were already backing away from him, distancing themselves from the blast zone. He was alone. "This is a mistake," Arthur wailed as the marshals swarmed the stage. "I am a pillar of this community. You can't touch me." They grabbed him. He fought, kicking and screaming, stripping away the last shreds of his dignity. As they cuffed his hands behind his back, he looked at Audrey one last time. His eyes were filled with a mixture of hatred and shock. He still couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe the girl he had underestimated had been the one to execute him. Audrey watched him being dragged away. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just watched, bearing witness to the collapse of the house of cards. The room slowly quieted as the marshals exited with their prisoner. The reporters, sensing the shift, turned their cameras back to the stage. They were waiting for a statement. They were waiting for the soundbite. Audrey stood alone at the podium. She looked tired. She looked invincible. She leaned into the microphone one last time. "My name is Audrey Sterling," she said, her voice echoing with finality. "And this investigation is closed." She turned and walked off the stage, leaving the microphone live, feeding back a high-pitched whine that signaled the end of the broadcast. 6 months later. The rain in Seattle never really stopped, but today it felt cleansing. Audrey sat in her new office in Pioneer Square. It was a far cry from the glass tower. It was a converted loft in a historic brick building. The floors were scuffed hardwood. The windows were drafty, and the sign on the frosted glass door was simple. Sterling Forensics. It wasn't prestigious. It wasn't intimidating. It was real. Sarah walked in, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You have a visitor," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "He says he doesn't have an appointment, but he claims to know the owner." Audrey looked up from the file she was reviewing, a pro bono case regarding a corrupt landlord. "Send him in." Declan Montgomery walked through the door. He looked different. The weight of the Montgomery name seemed to have lifted off his shoulders. He was wearing a suit, but it wasn't the stuffy corporate armor he used to wear. It was sharp, modern, and worn with an easy confidence. "So," Declan said, looking around the office. "Nice place. No marble, no gold leaf. I like it." "I prefer transparency," Audrey said, leaning back in her chair. "What brings you to the city?" "Declan." "How's the estate?" "The estate is gone," Declan said, sitting on the edge of her desk, just like he used to sit on the workbench in his garage. "The government auctioned it off last week to pay the creditors. Some tech billionaire bought it. I hear he's turning it into a silent meditation retreat." "Fitting." Audrey laughed softly. "That house has seen enough noise." "And Caleb?" Declan asked. The name hung in the air, heavy with history. "I heard he took a plea deal," Audrey said, her voice devoid of bitterness. 2 years in minimum security. He's working in the prison library. He writes me letters sometimes, asking for forgiveness, asking for money. "Do you answer?" "I don't open them," Audrey said. She picked up a letter opener and tapped it against the desk. "I have a shredder for a reason." "And Tiffany." "Working at a diner in Ohio," Audrey said. "Her name is Tiffany Smith now. She's trying to lay low. I imagine she's learning the value of $1 the hard way." "And you?" Declan asked. His voice dropped, becoming serious. He looked at her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "Are you happy, Audrey? After everything?" Audrey stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the street below. People were rushing to work, carrying umbrellas, living their lives. 6 months ago, She had been one of them, scared, driven by revenge, defined by what she had lost. Now she looked at her reflection in the glass. She saw a woman who had walked through fire and come out forged in steel. "I'm not happy, Declan," she said, turning back to him. "Happy is cheap. Happy is a wedding with an open bar and fake smiles." She smiled, then a genuine, warm expression that reached her eyes. "I'm powerful, and I'm free, and for the first time in my life, I'm writing my own ledger." Declan stood up and walked over to her. He extended his hand. "Well, Miss Sterling, I have a new business venture. I'm opening a custom restoration shop for classic cars, high-end, honest work. But I need a forensic accountant to make sure my partners don't rob me. Are you hiring?" Audrey looked at his hand. It was a calloused hand, a working hand, a hand she could trust. She took it. "For you, Declan," she said. "I might make an exception." In the end, Audrey didn't just survive the humiliation. She monetized it. She taught us that when life or a toxic ex tries to bury you, you have to realize you're a seed, not a corpse. Caleb and Tiffany wanted a spectacle, but they forgot the most important rule of high society. Never invite the person who knows where the bodies are buried, especially if she's the one holding the shovel. If you enjoyed this story of absolute revenge and corporate justice hit, that like button, it helps the channel more than you know. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss next week's story. Share this with an ex who needs a reality check. See you next time.